Now, you want to argue, I think, that the explosion in debt financing is very much linked to the greatest systemic problem facing capitalism, namely how to find enough outlets to invest surplus capital. Explain that to me. I mean, so what do we mean by surplus capital?
Well, at the end of the day, capitalists make a profit. And there are certain forces like competition and other reasons why they have to take part of that profit and reinvest it as new capital. And the result of this is that capital is committed to what I would call a minimum of a 3% compound growth per year. And you've always got to find new profitable investment opportunities. And that 3% growth has become harder and harder to actually locate, even though China has opened up, the Soviet Union collapsed, and all the rest of it. So there is a problem of absorbing the surplus capital and finding the profitable opportunities. And part of the argument is, if you look, profitable opportunities in manufacturing were less and less there. So more and more of the money, which the rich were getting, a large amount, gets invested in asset markets, like stock markets, property markets, commodity futures, and eventually, of course, starts to get invested in derivatives of derivatives on insurances of derivatives, all those crazy things that have absolutely no intuitive sense to any of us.
So we have more and more precarious uses of this money.
Precarious uses in what I would call fictional markets. And it's astonishing the number of fictional markets that have emerged since over the last 20 or 30 years. We have another one which is brewing right now, which is carbon trading as the answer to the global pollution problem, which can create a market in which people can speculate and probably earn a vast amount of money.
I suppose if we look at it now, I mean, because your analysis is pessimistic, some might say fatalistic, but some economic commentators would look now at what's going on. They'd say, well, we pulled through this crisis. I mean, perhaps Greece hasn't pulled through the crisis, but at least other countries are beginning to pull through the crisis. Quantitative easing has worked, pointing to signs of an upturn somewhat in the housing market, the stock market, the return to growth. It looks as though capitalism is finding its feet again.
Yes, there is a sense in which it is. The best evidence of that was that about 5 weeks ago we learned that 5 hedge fund managers had each earned $3 billion in 1 year. So some capitalists are doing very well right now. And of course they're saying the crisis is over. It's over, they're having a great time. They're assembling vast amounts of wealth out of this, whereas most of the population, like unemployment, there are still people being foreclosed on, and people are still losing their homes, and public services are being demolished in places like California. The whole educational system is being demolished, and we're seeing in Greece, of course, one of the things the Greeks are expected to do is to lose most of their privileges, lose their pension rights, in other words, the populations are being asked to sacrifice an immense amount of their wealth in order to support the $3 billion that these people are getting on Wall Street.
I mean, you want to get away from this idea of the 3% growth, perhaps even to talk about zero growth. But don't we see benefits that have come from economic growth? If we talk, for example, about, I'm just thinking of China, for example, the enormous improvements that there have been in infant mortality there. This seems to arise as a result of the growing economic prosperity of the country, which can take people out of poverty, feed them, house them, look after them.
Well, not necessarily. The big fall in infant mortality in China occurred in the Mao period. And I think it's important to remember that these improvements can occur under different regimes. But I think for a long time capital was very, very progressive and very constructive. It seems to me the balance would be say, well, it's worked. But we've now got to this point where 3% growth would mean we've got to find something like $1.5 trillion of new investment opportunities which are going to yield a profit. And in 10, 20 years' time, we'll have to find $3 trillion. In other words, we've reached a point where imagining a 3% compound rate of growth on all of the activity that's going on in China and South Asia and so on begins to look less and less feasible for environmental reasons, social reasons. And again, we find jobless recoveries going on, where capital does well, the people do badly.
You almost seem surprised in your book that people haven't risen up rather more effectively against some of the iniquities imposed upon them by the system you so graphically describe. I mean, is there a sense in which neoliberalism breeds a sort of individualism which militates against collectivism or collective responses?
I think the initial response to a crisis is for everybody to hunker down and hope that it goes away. And my parallel here was, the stock market crash occurred in the United States in, say, 1929. And it was only in 1933 that you start to see the social movements beginning to rise up and say, we have to change the world. And Roosevelt, who was not a revolutionary thinker or reformer, really, seeing that he was going to be forced to change it. So I guess we're in about the middle of that. So I say if this thing goes on for another couple of years, we may well see radical changes, and you start to see some signs of it on the streets in Greece as well as in the streets of California.
Okay, David Harvey, thank you very much. For the moment, do stay with us.